Hey everyone! Today we're going to be installing the shower valve in the bathroom. Stay tuned. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that since I don't have the frequent practice of soldering copper lines, I made a few errors that I attempt to point out as we go along. Okay, so I'm ready to get to work here, and the first thing that I've done is gone ahead and covered up the tub with the drop cloth. That's to protect it. And what I'm going to do first of all is take a look at this copper pipe down here. You can see right down there. There's some green corrosion on that pipe. Now, a lot of the work, or pretty much all the work, is going to occur in this stud bay here, but I also want to check this pipe out while I'm doing work in this wall. Okay, so to clean the pipe, I've got a little bit of apple cider vinegar. Typically, I've seen that white vinegar is used, but I don't have any white vinegar. So I've got apple cider vinegar. And I'm also using a little bit of baking soda here too. I used a brass brush to spread the vinegar baking soda mixture and clean the pipe. I then sanded the pipe with some 1000 and 2000 grit sandpaper. After cleaning up the pipe, I noticed a significant dent on the underside of the toilet stub out. Since that stub out is very close to the wall, I decided to cut between the main waste stack and the adjacent vent pipe and replace all the cold water copper up to the shower valve. The valve is going to be set at a different height anyway, and the cold water and hot water lines are actually crossed on the old valve, so the configuration is going to have to change. Alright, so I've decided to go with copper, so let's go over some of the tools and materials I'll be needing here. Let's start with the safety items. So I've got some gloves to protect my hands, and some goggles to protect my eyes. Next up, we have some paste flux, which is used to help the solder flow. Here's some lead-free solder. And I'll be using a flux brush to apply the flux. We'll come over to the deburring tool, which is used to remove burrs on the end of copper and to eliminate the restriction created when cutting copper. Here's some sandpaper for cleaning pipe and fittings by hand, which is especially useful in tight spaces. This is a 4-in-1 tool for cleaning the outside of pipes and the inside of fittings. One end is 1/2 inch and the other end is 3/4 inch. Let's look at the pipe cutting tools next. And one of my favorites is this tool here with a ratcheting head and a removable close quarters cutter. This is a typical pipe cutter that has a quick release lever. And it also has an adjustment dial. On the back of the tool is a foldable deburring knife also. The last cutter is one I picked up recently that automatically adjusts to cut cleanly through copper. To protect the walls from flames, I'll be using this flame protector that can withstand temperatures up to 2500 degrees. Included are 2 eyelets for hanging it. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty here and talk about fire. So I like to use MAP Pro gas, and I'll be pairing that with a TS8000 torch. I've also become fond of using this torch extension hose because it's less cumbersome to use on the torch than having the torch head attached to the bottle, especially when space is limited. If you ever have to turn the torch to heat the underside of a pipe, you won't have a flame shooting out the torch head. Included with the hose kit is a hook for hanging the bottle. A bungee may be useful for securing the bottle if there's nowhere to hang it. The last item I wanted to cover is a copper repair coupling. This is a typical coupling with a stop. Unlike a coupling with a stop, repair couplings have no stops. This accommodates situations where there's not enough room to install a coupling with a stop. Okay, so one thing I wanted to do is kind of strategize before I go ahead and shut the water off and start cutting away at these pipes here. So the first thing that I've done is put down some plastic to cover the floor, make sure we don't get water all over the floor. So I've got one container there, another container there, and a third container over there. That's to catch any water that comes out of the pipes. For the cold water line, I'm going to make a cut right between the 2 waste pipes. I'll cut right after the toilet shutoff, then near the wall stud to the right of the shutoff. I should then be able to slide some of the pipe out. I'll then cut the pipe in the stud cavity where the valve sits. For the hot water, I just need to make a cut on the pipe in the stud cavity where the valve sits. The last cut I need to make is on this copper here. And with the shower valve coming up, I'm hoping I can go ahead and reuse this. But you see there's a pretty nasty nick in that pipe there, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, so what I'm going to do first here is take out these copper supports. There's one here and two more down there. I'm going to try some vice grips. I think these worked last time when I was taking out supports in this wall, but I'm going to go ahead and give these a try and see if they work. To cut the support block, I use a Sawzall with a short blade. I made the cut horizontally instead of vertically to avoid cutting more drywall. Also, I would normally hold the Sawzall with one of my hands near the head of the Sawzall, but I was trying to stay out of the way of the camera here. Okay, time to turn off the water. There's a shutoff in the corner of my garage. Otherwise, I'd have to shut off the water at the meter in the front yard. A mistake I made here is that I didn't open up enough faucets to drain the lines, which proved to be problematic later. It was probably best to open them all. Just wiping the pipe off real quick here. Go ahead and line this up. I think that's probably about where I want to be. Cinch this down. All right. There's that one. Okay, so what I'm working on now is installing the new shower valve after I've got that old valve and all that copper pipe out of here. So I've got a block installed here. It's a 2x6 block. And what I'm doing primarily here is making sure I have the shower valve positioned correctly. So as we talked about before, we want to have the shower valve centered at about 32 inches off the floor. So what I've done here is made sure that half of this block is above that 32 inches and then half of the block is below the 32 inches. So that this shower valve sits right in the center here in terms of vertical height. So it looks good there. Then I wanted to set the depth. Didn't want to have this positioned where it met the maximum depth or the minimum. I just want to have a little bit of leeway just in case something changes in the installation of the tile. So I have it more kind of in between the two marks here. So about halfway between min and max. And that's around 3.5 inches, something like that. So I've got a couple plywood blocks here to represent the tile and the backer board that's going to go in. So the backer board is going to be 1/2 inch. The tile is going to be 1/4 inch. So these are 3/4 inch pieces of plywood. So if you measure from here to the front of this piece of plywood here, it's about 3 3/8 it looks like. And on that side, it is 3 3/8 also. So that's positioned perfectly to where the shower valve won't be tilted one way or the other. The other thing I did was I made sure this is nice and plumb. So I've got this level here, just put it on there. And it's nice and plumb. I also check level, even though that's not really as important to make as making sure that this thing is nice and plumb. So that's nice and level. And what I can do now is sink these 4 screws. There are 1, 2 here, and then 2 more down here. Those are 3-inch screws. To position the shower valve vertically in the stud cavity, I wanted to make sure it was centered on the tub's overflow. So I put some Scotch no residue duct tape just above the overflow hole, made a mark at the hole's vertical center, then used my level to make a plumb mark on the block. I then used a combination square to make a vertical line on the block. Using the leveling needle on the front cover and a torpedo level resting on top of the cover, I centered the valve on the line I'd drawn on the block. I then made a couple screw hole marks and installed the valve on the block with a 1.5-inch screw through each of the mounting holes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and work on the hot water first. So this is going to go that way, up the wall, under the block, then come up here, and then meet up with the valve here. I took some measurements, and in particular I wanted to make sure the horizontal section of pipe connecting to the hot water line was a little longer than necessary. I could then just cut it down to size as needed. Okay, so here's our first piece of pipe that I cut, and what I'm going to do here is just take the deburring tool here, and I'm just going to clean that out. So here's the elbow on the end, and then once I get this all dry fit and it looks good, I'll go ahead and solder everything up. Alright, so I finally got the cap off. I ended up having to cut the pipe. That's not really what I wanted to do, but using the torch and the channel locks to get this off. So I was using these channel locks here and the torch. What was happening was the pipe was starting to deform a little bit because of the heat. So I ended up just cutting that down. It's a little shorter than I want it to be, but that's fine. We'll make it work. Alright, so I've got this all mocked up for the hot water, and I just want to kind of go over my thought process here. So I've got a coupling with a stop on it, section of pipe. That section of pipe is nice and level. You see that there? I've got a jack holding it up temporarily. Then we have an elbow to change direction to go up the wall. And this section of pipe is nice and plumb. We've got a strap here with the screw going through it. And I cut off the other side of the strap here because there's only about a 1/2 inch between the edge of this wall and this pipe. So I just cut it off. This screw, I remember from when I put in the supply lines for the vanity, the screw has to either be some sort of a coated screw or like a brass screw. Because if you use like a metal screw, like a steel screw, that can cause issues. So we have an elbow here, section of pipe, elbow, another section of pipe, and another elbow, and then right to our valve here. Now you'll probably notice that I have a little bit of space between the wall and this pipe. And that is because I need to be able to get this pipe in here so I can solder it and be able to take it out so I can clean the pipe. Otherwise, if I have it too close to the wall, there's no way I can get this out of here. Alright, so I decided to solder some of this pipe outside of the wall because it was very close to the wall. So this is the part that connects up with the coupling on this end, and then it goes up the wall. So at least these pieces will be soldered outside of the wall. So in order to do that, what I had to do is make some marks on here. You can probably barely see them, but I've got one mark here, one mark here. I'll just line those up. And the same thing up here. I've got 2 marks, one here and one here. Now, in order for this to stay in place, I'm probably going to need some channel lock pliers so I can kind of lightly crimp this here. I've seen people do that before. We kind of lightly crimp right on the fitting and then just twist it, and it should stay right in place. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clean the pipes here before I solder them. So I've got this tool here. Now I need to be very careful that I don't sand off my marks though too. So let me do this one first. There's no marks on this one. I usually clean the pipe to about 3/4 of an inch past the end of the pipe. There we go. And inside of here too. That's what this end is for. All right, so I'm just going to apply some flux. This is flux. There's a flux brush. So what I'm going to do here, take this apart. You don't want to go too much past the fitting, where the fitting's going to go either. That's good enough. And I'm going to put some inside of the fitting also. Doesn't take a ton of flux. So I'll just do that to all the other parts too. Okay, so I'm going to lightly crimp this end here. This is where the marks need to line up. So I have them offset right now. And what I'm going to do is just lightly crimp here. Then I'll twist it. And those are lined up now. Okay, so I drilled a hole in the table so I could hang this bottle here. And what I'm going to do now is go ahead and solder these up. So I need to grab my solder, and I've got my torch ready to go, and we'll get rolling. This is a piece of insulation. I saw that one person used insulation to wipe off the solder to have a nice clean joint. You know, some people actually use like a wet towel too. So whatever works for you. I like this trick. I've used this several times. It works really well. Okay, so I've got the fire extinguisher ready to go if I need it, and I've got a small container of water over there. So I think we're ready to go here. One thing you're probably going to see me do as I solder, I'm going to try to keep the torch away from the end here. I want to have it right on the fitting. I don't want to have it on the end. Also, when I feed the solder, I'm not going to feed in too much. It doesn't take a whole lot of solder to weld these joints together. And the last thing is the torch. This torch heats up very fast. So it may take me probably no more than about 5 seconds to actually do a joint. So we'll see how that goes. Go ahead and turn everything on. Okay, it's ready to go. Let that cool down for a second here. One thing I wanted to point out is a nervous habit of mine where I apply the solder to two sides of the joint. It's really only necessary to apply the solder to the top side in this case and let the solder flow on its own to the underside of the joint. Alright, so I'm at the point where basically I can start getting ready to solder up the hot water line to the valve. So I want to take the cartridge out. So it's not much work to get it out. Going to use some channel locks here. It's already pretty loose. Loosen that. This comes off the front. This comes off here. And then you just pull this out. Like that. Now just make sure you know what the orientation of it is too. I've got the Grohe label right there on the side. So I want to make sure that's on the left-hand side when I put this back in. I should have also removed the stops to prevent damaging their gaskets and washers. For this valve, a 14mm socket is required to remove the stops. Alright, so I've got the hot water line soldered onto the valve, and I got rid of the video of this. I probably should have kept it though. And the reason for that is because I really wasn't all that proud of the job that I did here. It wasn't all that great an example of how to solder copper, so but I ended up getting this done. You can see there's some solder running out of the bottom of here, but there was enough flux in here and I didn't heat it up so much that I burned out the flux. That's a really important thing. And actually I pulled this off the wall just to take a look at all the joints. And I also, find it here, I also cleaned up all the joints with a brass brush so I could take a really close look at them. And they all look fine. So that looks good. One other issue I had is right down here. So I was wrapping this up, I got all these joints all finished, and I was getting ready to do this last one here. And when I went to solder that joint, there was still water in the line. So what happened there is the copper didn't heat up enough to where the solder would suck into that joint, and basically it ruined that joint. So I had to take this, cut this off here, and then I also cut over here so that I don't have to solder so close to this wall. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and run with a coupling with a stop on this end, and then a coupling without a stop on this side. And I'll run a section of pipe between these two areas here. There are several remedies for this situation. You can try putting a little white bread without the crust in the line to hold back the water long enough so you can solder. A second trick is to use a shop vac to suck the water out of the line. Thirdly, they make plugs you insert into the line using a sleeve, then you dissolve the plug with a torch. Alright, so the hot water line is done, and I was using this mirror here to check behind. I also had this small light, just shine it at the mirror while I was pointing it at all the joints, and it looks just fine. See links in the description below. Like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to check us out on social media. And thanks for watching.